Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Healing Outside the Box. My name is Jean Tiberio, and I'm a nutritionist and a wellness coach. For today's episode, I'm going to be talking a bit about the coronavirus, but I first want to say that my background is in nutrition and not public health. I'm not a medical doctor or anyone specializing in immunology, so I'm not an expert. I'm getting info from two websites only, the CDC website and the WHO or WHO website. I will give you links to both of those in the show notes. So I'm summarizing the information on those websites. As for my background, my major in college was nutritional biochemistry, and I've taken a few courses in microbiology and biochemistry. But again, I'm no expert, just saying. I'm doing this podcast because a few people have asked me questions like, can I build up my immune system so I can fight off the virus? Or is household bleach or Lysol better to kill viruses like the coronavirus? I do know something about killing germs because in food service, when we're feeding maybe 600 hospital patients and we need to know which disinfectants to clean the counters with that are safe and effective, we need to know about killing germs. So basically, I looked on those two websites and I'm regurgitating information on topics like that. But first, I'll tell you a little story about my recent trip to the ER and how that went. Recently, I had what was basically a bad sinus infection, but because the symptoms weren't going away, I headed to the ER. Even though I wasn't necessarily needing one, I took an ambulance because I am in a motorized wheelchair normally, and there was no one to drive my handicap van, and also no public transportation, like a taxi for wheelchairs. Because I have a respiratory disease and I was sick with an upper respiratory infection, they advised me to get checked out. So they wheeled me into the ER amidst a concoction of people coughing on stretchers, looking sad on stretchers, people chatting in the hallways, exhausted nurses, technicians driving equipment, and EMTs wanting their stretchers back. They couldn't get their stretchers back because there were no empty beds in the entire ER. So the fallout from the coronavirus scare was upon us. Throw in an overdose and the place was on full throttle. I actually was chatting with an EMT on my way home, and he said that part of the problem is that people are now calling 911 when they have a cough. Our ambulances are already occupied, and I imagine it will get worse before it gets better. So this was the scene that evening. They parked my stretcher in the hallway. They had to parallel park it because there were stretchers all up and down the length of the ER hallway. So once I was parked, they said hello, they put my bracelet on, and they took my temperature. And it was normal, which is the worst possible scenario for getting an empty bed. Long story short, I spent 5 hours being treated in the hallway, with the other people coughing and walking up and down. Then I was told I was fine and discharged. They had parked me facing the nurse's station, which was the best possible scenario for me. I tend to be a curious/nosy person, and I wanted to watch the happenings. I saw nurses and doctors leaning over the counters, coughing into their bare hands, sharing pens, and working for hours with barely a 5-minute break. As is usually the case with human beings, after about 4 hours or so I had to pee. I can't stand or walk, so I needed assistance with the bedpan. I also can't use the nurse's call button, so I signaled one of the hundreds of people walking by and asked them to grab a nurse. I told him that I needed to use the bedpan and I was uncomfortable having someone spreading my legs in the hallway. He said, "Oh yes, of course." And then he looked around with an expression that spelled out desperation. He signaled another nurse and they said they would wheel me into a room. The room was the nurse's lunchroom. Yes, indeed. They helped me with a bedpan in the same room that the nurses were eating their meals and drinking coffee. They did kick them out during the bedpan usage. Toward the end of the evening, the ER doctor leaned in and said, "It's probably a better idea if you get out of here. Viruses tend to spread easily in the hallway. How's that sound?" I said, "That is such a good idea." Now, I'm not necessarily hitting the panic button over this coronavirus thing, but if the ERs don't get more staff or additional facilities, I can't imagine them handling 3 times the amount of patients. Okay, so let's get back to the podcast. First, I'll give you a little info about bacteria versus viruses. And the big difference is that bacteria are cellular organisms. Viruses are not. So bacteria have a cellular wall and all the goodies are inside that they can use to get energy and reproduce. They need moisture and a carbohydrate source for energy. In any environment, they compete against other bacteria to either outgrow our healthy bacteria or die off when our healthy bacteria take over. You can destroy them by heat, acid, dehydrating or drying, salt, or by chemical means like sodium nitrites. You can also kill them with a high % of alcohol. The alcohol is not necessarily going to kill cold or flu viruses. With the bacteria that require oxygen, you can control them by shutting off their oxygen supply. And of course, there's antibiotics that you can take in pill form. The antibiotics work on bacteria in a few different ways. They can attack the outer protective wall of the bacterial cell. They can interrupt the reproduction of new bacterial cells. In other words, they go after the DNA. Or they can interfere with their protein production. And of course, they need proteins to reproduce. But viruses are not cellular organisms, so antibiotics won't work for viruses. Viruses can lay dormant on surfaces, but also need moisture to stay alive. So if there is a virus on a surface and you touch that surface and then rub your eyes, the virus can enter your system through your eyes. Ditto for your nose or mouth. Here's how the virus works. It doesn't have an energy source because it doesn't have a cell to hold in the glucose. So it latches onto our cells and busts its way in, completely uninvited. Once it is inside our cells, it uses our energy source to make copies of itself. Our cells will eventually die off because the virus just keeps replicating, depriving our cells of what it needs to stay alive. Our cells will then stop functioning or die. We do have natural immunity when getting attacked by viruses. Our body will raise its body temperature because viruses have a tight range of temperatures, and they will die off, generally speaking, above 100 or 101 degrees Fahrenheit. And we also have our usual immune system with all its T cells and so forth that can go after viruses. Now, I'm sure you know that certain viruses attack certain cells. Respiratory viruses attack the cells in our upper respiratory tract, ear, nose, throat, or lower respiratory tract, the lungs. This coronavirus, or COVID-19 as it's called, was just discovered last year. The initial symptoms can start anywhere between 2 and 14 days. The most common symptoms are fever, tiredness, and a dry cough. But there are other flu-like symptoms as well. We now know that you can have relatively mild symptoms for a few days before the severe symptoms kick in, if they kick in at all. Right now, about 80% of people will recover without having to have any specific hospital treatments. Recovery usually occurs in about 2 weeks. About 1 in 6 people will become seriously ill and have shortness of breath. They will need to go to the hospital immediately. The people more likely to become seriously ill are the elderly, chronically ill people with something like cystic fibrosis or muscular dystrophy, and people with problems like high blood pressure, diabetes, heart problems, and obese people using CPAP for sleep apnea. Although there's not necessarily a direct connection between something like diabetes and death from coronavirus, the Journal of the American Medical Association reports a slightly higher death rate among people with these pre-existing conditions. 10% higher for cardiovascular disease, 7% higher for diabetes, 6% higher for chronic respiratory disease like COPD, 6% higher for hypertension, and 5% higher for cancer. Again, that doesn't mean that getting coronavirus with one of those diseases is necessarily a death sentence. It just means that there is a higher risk. So, like most viruses, if an infected person coughs, the virus particles in the moisture droplets land on surfaces. And then another person touches those surfaces and then, say, rubs their eyes. You can also breathe in the droplets, but apparently only if you're standing about 3 feet or less from the infected person. You are generally not likely to get infected if another person has no symptoms, but if they have mild symptoms and they are doing any coughing, then the virus can spread. So how do you protect yourself? Well, first of all, you don't need to wear a mask unless you have symptoms yourself. These rules are different for healthcare workers, whether in the hospital or at home. By the way, I've downloaded a paper from the WHO on how to care for a patient at home. Home healthcare workers who do this for a living may want to check the website and read the paper. I'll give you a link to it in the show notes. The virus can survive on surfaces for anywhere from a few hours to several days, depending on the moisture and temperature conditions. So it might be a good idea to clean your counters and faucet handles daily if you have kids with dirty hands, or maybe just in general. Obviously, washing hands frequently or after you've been in contact with someone that might be carrying the virus is a very good idea. And they recommend washing with soap and water for about 20 seconds. Secondly, it might be helpful to know the difference between cleaning, disinfecting, and sanitizing. Cleaning works by using soap or detergent and water and physically removes the virus from surfaces. Disinfecting kills viruses on surfaces. Disinfecting works by using chemicals to kill the viruses on counters or objects. It doesn't necessarily clean the surface, but it kills the virus. Sanitizing lowers the number of viruses on these surfaces to a safe level, as judged by, say, public health standards or requirements. You can use sanitizing chemicals or hot water above 180, and that should sanitize against viruses. What should you sanitize? Well, anything that gets touched by multiple people. And that might be desks, countertops, doorknobs, computer keyboards, phones and tablets. Let's not forget about pens, faucet handles, and toys. There may be specific instructions for bathrooms in schools, but that's up to the school. In my opinion, people should buy gloves that you can get at Walgreens or CVS rather than or addition to masks. Gloves will also help your fingers from getting exposed to the chemicals, like say in a high concentration of Clorox bleach. Rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol probably won't work as well because it is thought to denature proteins, and that's how it works. So it works against bacteria, which are cellular organisms, but not so much viruses, which act a bit like a parasite. Now, for the question of which works better, Clorox bleach or Lysol, my personal opinion is that I would go with Clorox. Clorox bleach is very effective killing the viruses on hard surfaces. Clorox is sodium hypochlorite. Lysol is hydrogen peroxide, which is also effective for killing viruses. So Clorox, sodium hypochlorite, at a concentration used in household bleach, about 5 to 6%, is something that I would go with. I recommend that you follow the directions on the label because too much or too little hypochlorite is not a good idea. By the way, the FDA warned the Purell manufacturer to stop saying that it was effective against the coronavirus. The main ingredient in Purell is ethanol. Yes, I know vodka is also ethanol. Just saying. Purell can help, but it's not the best approach to take if you have a family member that might be infectious. Now, Clorox makes different cleaning compounds. Clorox bleach kills with chlorine. Again, specifically, it's sodium hypochlorite. Some products that Clorox makes contain sodium peroxide, like Lysol does. Clorox also has disinfecting wipes, which contain quaternary ammonium compounds. In the last case, it uses ammonia, which is toxic to viruses as well. Now, let's talk about what we could do to build our immune system. Let's start with the don'ts and then the do's. Number 1 don't. Smoking deprives your lungs of an optimal amount of oxygen, so it lowers your total lung capacity and can also interfere with healthy circulation throughout your bloodstream and into your organs. So that's in the don't category. My guess, and this is a guess, is that people with cardiovascular disease who run a 10% higher risk of serious illness or fatality might also be smokers in some cases. But again, there's no data on this because this is a brand new disease. Number 2, taking antibiotics to fight against a virus will not work. The healthy organisms in your GI tract, called your microbiota, will be adversely affected by taking antibiotics. So this could do more harm than good, is what I'm saying basically. Number 3, taking all kinds of herbal supplements will more than likely be an unnecessary expense. Number 4, as I've mentioned, buying and wearing face masks if you're not sick may also be unnecessary. Buying gloves at the drugstore and using them to clean counters, or maybe even to cook your raw chicken or raw meat, is definitely a do. Okay, here are more of the do's. Number 1, get plenty of sleep. My general rule of thumb is, if the first thing you say when you wake up is, "Oh my God," you may be not getting enough sleep. Number 2, it will always help to take steps to avoid other infections. Some acute illnesses, like a foodborne illness, may make you more vulnerable to a viral infection. Any acute illness stresses out your body physiologically. Number 3, drink alcohol in moderation. Number 4, it's always a good idea to get outside and get some exercise. The weather is definitely getting better. Yay. It was 61 degrees in Salem, Massachusetts today. Number 5, in terms of food, the first thing we suggest for our immune system is to eat a diet that is high in fruits and vegetables. The 3 vitamins we suggest are vitamin C, which is killed with cooking, by the way, so fresh vitamin C is best. Also vitamin B6, vegetables are a great source, and vitamin E. Vitamin E is the strongest antioxidant. It even goes after free radicals. Vitamin E can be found in your oils, nuts, and seeds. Most people suggest vitamin C when they have a cold virus, and this would apply here if you have initial symptoms of something that might be a coronavirus, but it will not prevent the virus. It will support your immune system in fighting it. These immune system vitamins may be especially important if you have some chronic condition that involves an inflammatory process. So we're talking about Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, COPD, cystic fibrosis. Now, immunoglobulins are proteins, which might make us think that we need more protein, but most of us get plenty of protein. The issue for most of us is that the processed or junk foods in our typical American diet make our body work a little harder to get enough nutrients to work efficiently. And yes, I'm aware that Girl Scout cookies just came out, and I'm also painfully aware that they are very yummy. In terms of other foods, items like green tea have not been shown to be effective in fighting viruses, but if any tea calms you down, then that's great. And that brings me to number 6, which I think may be one of the most important ways to keep your immune system healthy, and that is stress reduction. Relaxation techniques have been shown to be effective in keeping our immune system strong. Basically, any relaxation technique can work, whatever rows your boat, as I like to say. I like to practice a mantra-type meditation, but anything that relaxes you or reduces your anxiety level will help. We all know that we are more likely to catch colds when we're stressed out. I'm guessing that the coronavirus would be no different. And how could it possibly hurt? Now, if you have any questions, I'm available via my website contact page, and that's healingoutsidethebox.com. Then click on Contact Us at the top. I'll also give you a link in the show notes. In addition, I have a texting program on my website now, on all pages. It's called talk.to. Just click on the little waving hand in the lower right-hand corner if I'm online, or click on the envelope if I'm not online, and I'll get back to you. That way you could text me with any questions if I'm around and on my computer. Now that's all I have for you today. Be well, and I mean that, and stay tuned next week for another episode of Healing Outside the Box.